Good evening and welcome to tonight's session of Lockdown Learning. My name is Bren Carlil and I am the Public Affairs Director at the Zionist Federation of Australia. I'm so grateful you came. It was quite unfortunate last week to see that little technical glitch and to be prevented from hearing Iman in conversation. However, we've managed to secure Iman for Thursday, the 4th of June, which is in about a week and a half's time. And of course, we will send you out information about that. Before I introduce you to Rachel and Moriah, I want to talk for about 30 seconds about who we'll be speaking with next week. In partnership with the United Israel Appeal Australia, we'll be speaking with Isaac Herzog and Stephen Lowy. Now, Isaac, apart from being descended from Zionist royalty, is also the chair of the executive of the Jewish Agency for Israel. And Stephen Lowy is the chair of the World Board of Trustees of Keren HaYesod. And they will be in conversation with Yair Miller, the CEO of United Israel Appeal Australia. That's going to be a really powerhouse conversation next weekend, so I look forward to you joining us then. However, now I'm going to turn you over to Yaniv Nachmias. Yaniv is the Executive Director of the Department of Diaspora Affairs at the World Zionist Organization, and he is going to talk a little bit about his role and to introduce our guests tonight. Yaniv.
Thank you, Bran. I'm thrilled to be here, our first joint initiative of the Lockdown Learning of the Zionist Federation in Australia and the Department for Diaspora Affairs. My name is Yaniv Nachmias. I'm the Executive Director of the department. The department is headed by Mrs. Gusti Yoshua Braverman, a member of the WZO Executive and the representative of Artsenu in the National Institutes. Together with our shlichim, with Zionist federations all around the world, we have plenty of activities aiming on strengthening the connection of diaspora Jewry with Israel and with Zionism. And I invite you after the session to go on our Facebook page and see some of those activities. In those challenging times, our iVision live sessions and open-minded discussion about different topics related to Israel and Zionism are actually the reply to what we can actually do from home. Usually we do it during the evening time in Israel and it doesn't really fit the Australia time zone, but this time we had a joint effort to make it in time that will also suit you in a convenient time for you. Actually, this day as a former Jerusalemite, Yom Yerushalayim have a very special meaning for me. Memories of what I used to do as a youngster, memories of walking the streets. And this year actually allows us the opportunity, this weird situation, to sit at home and actually to dream about the Jerusalem that we would like to envision and the Jerusalem we would like to portray in the future. For the program tonight, we're delighted to host former Knesset member and Deputy Mayor of Jerusalem, Rachel Azaria. Nowadays, Rachel is dealing with renewal democracy. She will be hosted by Moriah Bar David, Director of the Zionist Federation of Australia Israel office. I've had the pleasure of hearing Rachel a few times before in our iVision live sessions, and I'm sure it's going to be fascinating just as it was before. So I wish you all a meaningful and enriching program, and thank you for joining us. And Moriah, I pass it over to you.
Thank you so much, Yaniv, and thank you, Brent, for the intro. I'm super excited to host Rachel. Hi, Rachel. It's lovely to have you here in our lockdown session. It's actually interesting because preparing to this conversation, I learned that our path is crossed somewhere when we were little kids. Our dads worked together and we're coming from kind of a similar background. So aside from sharing the love to Israel and to Jerusalem, we also have some things in common. So hi Rachel.
Hi, happy to be here. And yeah, that was pretty exciting to discover that we actually probably met sometime in the past, like 30-something years ago.
100%. So before we're delving into, Jerusalem and what are the changes that were happening in the past few years, I'd like to just ask, out of curiosity, we just passed Yom Yerushalayim and, considering Corona, I was curious to know, how did you celebrate Yom Yerushalayim on Friday?
So first of all, hi to all Australians. So yeah, it was challenging because every year what we did, I'll say a bit about myself. I was a Jerusalem City Councilwoman and then Deputy Mayor, and I headed my own party. And our party was looking at how to redesign the like tribal part of Jerusalem in many different ways. And one of the ways was through the Yom Yerushalayim, which the way it's being celebrated in Israel, that's the, you know, the common way is that most people don't celebrate. And the right wing, they usually go like in the old city and also the Arab areas. And something that I used to do as a little girl, I used to go to this kind of parade and it was a lot of fun. Today, it's something that like only real right wing do, and the rest kind of don't really participate in any kind of party. So what we did is that we started a parade. We called it the Family Jerusalemite Parade. And it's just a parade that marches through neighborhoods in Jerusalem. And everyone gathers and there are like trumpets and street orchestra kind of marching with us. And there are always popsicles for the little ones. And then there is a big band at the end with a big celebration. And that's like the way we celebrated Jerusalem. This year, obviously, it wasn't relevant. And I went for a long run in Jerusalem. I love running and I love Jerusalem. And I posted it on my Facebook, you know, me running in Jerusalem, like the two big loves of my, like two of the big loves of my life. And we hope that next year we'll be able to have again our usual celebrations.
100%. So growing up, you know, you didn't grow up in Jerusalem, but I guess that you had, you know, a passion or like, I'm sure that you have a memory of where was the first time that you said, you know, I'm very passionate about this city. I want to take part in changing it. Can you just, you know, describe this moment where you felt this is my place?
So actually, I was born in Jerusalem. We left when I was 5 years old. I always knew I would come back. It's like one of the first memories is I know I'm going to be a Jerusalemite. It was always clear to me. I know, you know, when I graduated from high school, I went to the army. After the army, I registered only to Hebrew U. I knew I was going to be a Jerusalemite. And what happened was that I was very active in social change organizations. I was in the environmental movement, and I was, you know, for a decade. And then I ran an organization for agunot, women that can't get their Jewish divorce, their get. And then when everyone started leaving the city, you know, I was wondering what to do, because in the meantime, I got married. I was a mother of two. I was like, my life was exactly the way I had dreamt it would be. Living in Jerusalem, working in something I believe in, you know, everything was just, it was, you know, perfect. But all my friends were leaving the city and we had to make a decision. We decided we don't want to leave the city. But once it was clear to us that we don't leave the city, it was clear that the way to make a difference is only by doing something and not just, you know, continuing our regular life. At first, I thought to found an organization that would work on the benefit of Jerusalem. But then someone told me the way to make a difference is through politics. Honestly, that wasn't like, you know, you have quite a few politicians that from a very young age, they knew they wanted to be politicians. That wasn't part of my, you know, passions. I went into politics because I realized that's where I can make a difference. And that's it. Founded a party together with some friends and all the rest is history. That was in 2008.
I feel like in 2008, there was a lot of, you know, activism. There was a wave of activism, especially by young people. Like I also graduated university back then, and I ran in politics in my own city where I was born. So I can totally identify with it. But really, like since, as you said, since 2008, things really changed in Jerusalem. I remember coming back, you know, having going for a tour in one of the holidays with my kids, and like, you know, everything just changed. Even I'm talking about the view, about the face of Jerusalem, but I'm sure that a lot of, you know, in a lot of other aspects, things changed. Can you point out and elaborate on the changes that we happen to see here in Jerusalem in the past few years?
Yeah, so I think that the past decade was a decade where we started the discussion in Jerusalem, the discussion that now we're kind of starting in the wider Israeli society about what kind of city we want to live in. And at first, it seemed that as if this is going to be an ultra-Orthodox city. We had an ultra-Orthodox mayor a little more than a decade ago. And it was very clear what the path is where we're going. And then Nir Barkat ran for mayor, and our party, we ran for city council, Jerusalemite. There was another party, we worked together, we merged. And when we got elected, so it was clear that we need to redesign. And the idea was to make room for everyone, but making room for everyone never works by singing Kumbaya. The way you make room for everyone is that you tackle the issues that are the core issues that we need to deal with. Because, you know, just sitting and kind of ignoring the challenges, it doesn't work. So during the campaign, like every candidate, what was very common at the time was that everyone had to have their poster on the bus. So also I wanted the poster on the bus, I headed the list, and we got together, we raised some money, and I called the bus company. I was like, you know, how do we do it? How do we organize it? And we finalized everything, the price, the routes of the buses, the dates, everything. Just before I got off the phone, he says, I just want to make sure you know that there are no women on buses in Jerusalem. Now, I kind of, you know, when you hear something that's way that you can't even believe, so often you don't really hear it. So I just continued talking, you know, how do we pay? When do we pay? And he was like, did you hear what I said? I said, yes. So he said, who heads the list? I said, I do. So he said, so your poster will be on the bus. I said, of course. So he said, aren't you a woman? And I was like, yeah, but I'm very modest. I'm modern Orthodox, so I'm modest. I know the rules. Don't worry, everything will be okay. I'm running for city council. It's not. And he started laughing. He said, nothing to do with modesty. Not a 3-year-old and not an 8-year-old. There are no women on buses in Jerusalem. Now that was an eye opener. I walked out to the street and we started counting the buses going by, and there were really no women. That's always interesting how when things change, no one ever, you know, announces that's going to happen. It just, you have to notice. When bad things happen, usually they happen gradually and kind of, you know, go unnoticed at the beginning. So we decided not to give up. We went to the press, and then later went to the Supreme Court. In Israel, I don't know the Australian system, but in Israel, because we got the British system, so if there's something that's against one of your basic rights, you can go immediately to the Supreme Court. This was against the right to be elected, which is one of our basic rights, because all the men had their posters on the bus. Went to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court, it was the day before the elections. They said they have to have our posters on the bus, and then there were buses traveling throughout the city on the day of the elections with the posters, and it was all over the press, and it gave us very good publicity. At the end of the day, we didn't know it at the time, at the beginning, and that's when I got elected to city council. And from then, what we were doing is we were tackling the different conflicts. So I think that we can map out, one is ultra-Orthodox and secular religious, okay? The other is secular religious, not necessarily ultra-Orthodox. And the third is the Eastern Jerusalem, Western Jerusalem, like the Arabs and the Jews. I think those are the three major conflicts, and every one of them, we dealt with them very differently. Would you like me to elaborate on just every one?
It's actually interesting because one of the questions that I wanted to ask you was, if you see these, you know, different sectors work together or like grow separately and grow apart, like have, you know, different communities for each one of them, but they will never kind of, you know, collaborate or partnership together for something that is a bit bigger than just their own sector. So the question is, if you manage to kind of connect between them, or they just grow apart. But I must say that this whole, like what you're describing when you were trying to run for, you know, for city council and the buses and, you know, women on buses is just like, it's, as a woman, it just does so much to me that I can't even describe in words.
So yeah, that was the beginning of a long-lasting campaign, 4 years campaign. We went back to the Supreme Court again and again. There were buses in which women had to sit in the back of the bus, went to the Supreme Court and we won. Then there were separate streets. There were streets that were men only, and streets women only, and again went to the Supreme Court, again we won. But After that, the Israeli government finally realized that they have to deal with this issue and it's here to stay. And that's when the legislation changed, because till then it was legal. And every time we had to go to the Supreme Court and to argue that it's against the, the basic law that for dignity and honor, freedom and dignity to all, that's the basic law. And every time we had to argue that it's against the basic law. So after the legislation changed, so suddenly things got easier. But I'll go back to your question. I think that we have to look at every one of these challenges separately. The secular and religious groups, or the modern Orthodox, or it depends how you, or like the Zionist Orthodox, these are two groups that we really managed to create amazing cooperation between the two groups. From two groups that were, very separate, and everyone thought that the way they imagined Jerusalem is very different. We started calling ourselves the pluralistic group, which meant secular and religious, and we worked together. For example, we were working to change the decision-making regarding the mikvaot, the ritual baths. We wanted them to be renovated and not to build as many, because to build them in the neighborhoods we need and not in neighborhoods where there are political issues. And there were other issues that women could decide the way they go to the mikveh and it won't be by the rabbinate. And that was something that we had secular and Orthodox women working together, which that could never happen like 20 years ago. And on the other hand, or maybe it's the same thing, we had the kosher issues. We discovered that a lot of the kosher certificates in Jerusalem are not worth it, the paper they're written on, because they're just, the businesses paid a lot of money, but no one actually discussed with them or checked with them what was happening. So we started an alternative Orthodox kosher system, and that was also made by secular and Orthodox people together, and it's a huge success. Today it's run by Rabbanet Sohar, which is a huge rabbinical organization. And it's like they have hundreds of businesses throughout the country that are using this certificate, which we started in Jerusalem as like a fringe group. And another example was when the secular said that they need open places on Shabbat to have, a good time with their own communities, with their children. So we were Orthodox and secular working together to open the community centers on Shabbat for secular families. So I think in the secular and Orthodox, there was a lot of cooperation. If we want to think of the other groups, so the ultra-Orthodox, I told you a bit about the campaign against segregation, disappearance of women from public sphere, when we had women sit in the back of the bus. I was sure when we started the campaign that it's against the Orthodox, the ultra-Orthodox, because, they were the ones demonstrating against us and talking against us. And I can't express how surprised we were when ultra-Orthodox women started joining our campaign. Because what we discovered is that also they hate sitting in the back of the bus. So if we thought that it was, ultra-Orthodox against secular and modern Orthodox, apparently there was much more of a cooperation. Eastern and Western Jerusalem, I think that's something that's happening. It's not even very organized. It's just kind of happening because of Israeli economy, the Jerusalem economy, and also because that when the fence was built around Jerusalem after the Second Intifada, starting at 2001 later on, so suddenly they became much more Jerusalemites. And they were cut off from a lot of the relationships they had with Hebron and Shechem, the different cities in the West Bank, and they became much more Jerusalemites. And economically, there's a lot of cooperation. Now, during the Corona, the cooperation got even much more intensive. And I'll just give you a small example. The hospitals work together. Everyone realized, that this is a moment that everyone has to work together, and the hospitals work together. And it was very important for the mayor, Moshe Leon, he's the mayor today in Jerusalem. He wanted to make sure that everyone really knows how to cooperate. And in the Independence Day, the Israeli Independence Day, the Israeli Army, Tzahal, they had airplanes flying from hospital to hospital, kind of saluting to the doctors. And it was important to the doctors in Eastern Jerusalem, to the hospitals in Eastern Jerusalem, that during the Day of Independence, which is, it's the Nakba for Eastern Jerusalem, but that the airplanes of the IDF will go over their hospitals too and salute to their doctors. So this is something that we could never, ever imagine. It was so important to them. And it was really a moment where we could see new cooperation that we couldn't imagine 10 or 15 years ago. So I think that what's happening in Jerusalem is that we're all trying to find a way to live together. It's not always very easy, but I think that it's always surprising how much like that the ultra-Orthodox women were with us in the campaign. At first it was really surprising, then it made sense. So the same thing like with the hospitals in Eastern Jerusalem, it's first of all, it's like very surprising, but then it makes sense. So I think that if we kind of move away from politics, from classic politics, and we talk about the people out there in the field, I think it is different. Although obviously, if there'll be some kind of terror attack or anything that will be held by the Jerusalem municipality that will be against the Palestinians or anything, so obviously everyone will go back to their groups very quickly. But in everyday life, we can see something very different than we ever imagined.
As you said, I think that, naturally also with the economy in Israel and like other things that are happening, so you do see cooperations. But the question is if, as a municipality, there were initiatives that, try to encourage these cooperations. For example, I know that the light train is passing through the Arab sector. Do Arabs actually, use this service? Do they ride on it? Or even like, are there more examples to show how, as a municipality, you try to encourage these connections or bringing all these, they're not minorities, but like, Arabs and ultra-Orthodox to the center and cater for them as well?
So first of all, the light rail, obviously, and also all of the public sphere in Jerusalem is very inclusive. I think that everyone lives in a different neighborhood, but like the shopping centers, the museums, the markets, everything is very kind of cohesive. But we live in separate neighborhoods, and I think that that's something that works. Whenever we have groups moving into other people's neighborhoods, that's when the challenges begin. Now, I know it's not PC to say that, and obviously everyone has the right to live wherever they want to live. But I think the way we try to see it is everyone has the right to do it, but it's not necessarily a right that you have to use that moment. I mean, if you use it, you're probably going to threaten the other group, because just like if the other group would move into your neighborhood, it will kind of threaten you. So this is something that I think that the more that we try to kind of respect, it's easier. We see the light rail, we can see the public sphere. Also during the Ramadan, now it's the Ramadan, the Eid al-Fitr is starting today. So during the Ramadan, there were, because of the coronavirus, there were a lot of economic challenges. So the municipality was giving out dinners and giving out food in Eastern Jerusalem. Again, that's something I can't tell you how, no one could imagine that just a decade ago. Something is changing. Everyone is changing. I don't think we know yet how to narrate this change and how to kind of hold on to it, but something is definitely changing. And I think that it is, as I said, it works better when we don't talk about it too much. Just like, who moves to which neighborhoods, the more we kind of just, let it be and respect in a quiet way, it works better, which is hard because on the one hand, you want to have like, clear ground rules, or you want the municipality to be able to be very clear about what they're doing. But apparently when, everything works better when things are kind of, less loud. I think we had a very loud decade. Everything was on the table. We had campaigns, almost every group was campaigning against each other. Ultra-Orthodox against secular, and secular against ultra-Orthodox, and Arabs and Jews. We also had Muhammad Abu Khder. I don't know if you watched on, I think it's Netflix, the series Our Boys, and it's about the murder of Muhammad Abu Khder by 3 Jews or Jew terrorists, I don't know how to call it. Some were Jerusalemites, some weren't, and Muhammad Abu Khder was a Jerusalemite. Muhammad Abu Khder's story is very interesting because if you were asking what the municipality does to make things more inclusive, he went to high school, which is part of the Israeli system. So I'll give you a teeny bit about the school system in Eastern Jerusalem. When Teddy Kollek, right after the city was united, there was a decision made that they will study the Hashemi or the Jordanian school system because everyone thought that this uniting of the city won't last forever. So, they kind of continued, or even if they didn't think it won't last forever, it was clear that that's going to be their center. So they studied that school system. And what happened was and then they don't know Hebrew. So what happened was since the fence was built around Jerusalem, suddenly you have a lot of residents from Eastern Jerusalem that come, they want to study Hebrew because that's being part of the working force. And then the parents started saying, why should they study Hebrew when they graduate from high school? Maybe they should study Hebrew at high school, and maybe they can study the curriculum of the Arabs that live within Israel, that live in Nazareth, that live in Haifa. And they asked the municipality, that was when I was a city councilwoman at the time, and they asked if we can organize schools where they can study, the Israeli Arab curriculum. And, we were sure, why not, if that's what the parents want. And quite a few of these schools were open. And suddenly at Al Jazeera, started a huge campaign against these schools because they said you're normalizing the conflict between Israel and the Palestinians. So you can't send your children. So we had, the numbers were much, much larger, but then, on September 1st, there were less students that came to study because of the campaign at Al Jazeera. But the following year, there wasn't a campaign anymore, and, it was very successful. So you had many more parents that send their kids. Muhammad Abu Khder studied at one of these schools, a school that till he was murdered, they would have a group going to Poland to visit Auschwitz every year. So
Wow.
That was a real school, yes, that was looking to see how we're making it possible for Israelis and Eastern Jerusalem, Western Jerusalem to live together, Israelis and Arabs, Israelis and Palestinians. And I think that was, it doesn't appear in the series, but I think that's one of the most painful. Every youngster that's murdered is painful. But when you think that he was trying to be part of the solution, and he was murdered, that is very hard. After he was murdered, at the time I was deputy mayor in Jerusalem, I was responsible for education. We were working very, very hard to create cooperation between the principals in Eastern and Western Jerusalem, and to try to find a way to make this wave, kind of to lower the flames and to make it work. Very quickly started the big, in the Gaza Strip, there was a big attack. We attacked them, they attacked us, so that made it very, very hard. And we really had to hold on to the city during these very hard times and to kind of try to convince everyone that violence will not be the solution. I'll elaborate a teeny bit more about this. What happened was that very quickly we had youngsters from Eastern Jerusalem that they were throwing stones or Molotov bottles on our students from Western Jerusalem. Think about it. I'm deputy mayor, responsible for education in Jerusalem, responsible for Eastern and Western Jerusalem, and I have students from Eastern Jerusalem that are trying to kill my students from Western Jerusalem. Both of them are my students. And the solution we found, which I think is interesting, the first thing we did is we brought in a lot of soldiers, like police soldiers. That's what we do in Jerusalem, 2,000 of them, which is very dramatic to do that. And at the same time, we started talking to the principals. Now, what happened was that when the soldiers came in, every time the students would throw stones or Molotov bottles or try stabbing or anything, they would escape to the schools. Because, that's where they thought they could blend in the crowd. And then the soldiers would chase them into the schools because they had to catch them. But once they chased them into the schools, very quickly, the teachers said, that's it. If that's what happens, the day is lost. No one studies. Everyone's like, oh, crazy. And, we can't teach anything and we're losing our students. So we got to agreement with the commanders of the Mishmar HaGvul, like the police army, that they don't go into the schools. The schools are sterile areas, but under two circumstances. The principals had to commit. One is that all the students come every day to school. And second is we got a budget from the government to continue the school day till 8 o'clock in the evening with music and sports. So basically we let them do something else with their adrenaline and, and make sure they'll be in school. It was so amazing. The level of cooperation was so amazing that we had principals and teachers that will go at 7 o'clock in the morning and knock on students' doors, teenagers, drag them out of bed to make sure they come to school at 8 o'clock, when the bell rings, because that was the agreement, because otherwise the police can chase into the school. And it worked. It worked. The wave of terror declined so quickly, which is, I think that in Israel, we always say, the right wing says, if you're tough with the Arabs, that's what will solve everything. And then the left wing is like, you have to find a way to work together and you have to, be much more understanding. And we saw that the way that works is when we do both. On the one hand, there were the police and the army that were very tough. And on the other hand, there was this amazing cooperation with the principals. And it really, I think that's one of the biggest successes. So if you're asking Eastern, Western Jerusalem, I think that we know how to create cooperation. I think it's not like like I said, it's not a kumbaya way. It's like when things get very, very tough, or when we tackle the tough areas, we know that we have to be very clear about what's important to us and very clear about how to make the change happen. And surprisingly enough, it works. So also with the Arabs and also like Jews and Arabs and also with the ultra-Orthodox, I think that's the way we need to think of these issues.
It's amazing how on one hand it sounds super complicated to manage and to be able to kind of calm down the adrenaline and like the violence or like this wave that happened. And on the other hand, there are things that are, in international relations, you have this expression that is called soft power. And this is basically, by education, this is what you do. You learn how to not to use force, or not to use soldiers and police, but like to kind of educate for of togetherness and learning from each other, which is amazing. I'd like to touch this topic about the fact that in the past, a lot of youngsters didn't find themselves in Jerusalem, and a lot of them left. And even like we had here in one of our lockdown sessions, Gil Chovav, that said that in the past, Jerusalem was a place of scholars and intellect, and like today, you don't see it as much. What's your thought? What's your thoughts about it and about youngsters living or choosing to live in Jerusalem, if at all?
So first of all, yes, we had a huge wave of youngsters leaving the city a decade ago. That's when I went to Jerusalem. That's what I told you. That's when I decided to go into Jerusalem politics, because so many of my friends were leaving. He said, if we're staying, we have to make sure we have a city to stay in, and we'll be just the last one here. And it's true that the city is changing. I think you don't see as many secular scholars. I think you still have like modern Orthodox scholars. You have the Hartman Institute and like the Begin Center and many centers that do, and the Van Leer Center. You have a lot of centers that have a lot of scholars, but yes, it is changing. For a while there, like 7 to 10 years, you had all of the social activism was Jerusalemite. Like everything happened in Jerusalem. Everything started in Jerusalem. Jerusalem was very strong in social activism. I told you the Kashrut program. I told the Mikvaot program. Young families, everything that had to do with young families, we initiated in Jerusalem. We were a step before everyone. I think that's not there either anymore, which is interesting because like we had 10 very crazy and intensive years, you know, and everything was very challenging. And suddenly the city is kind of, you know, looking for this kind of peace and quiet, which is interesting. I think that what we do see is more initiatives of cooperating between different communities. I think that's where we're going towards, like smaller communities and creating smaller communities. It's hard to tell where the city is going towards. I think that Jerusalem, in a sense, is always a decade before Israel. So at least I can say that Jerusalem now is more optimistic than what's happening in Israeli politics. Today, Netanyahu, our prime minister, is going to go to court. It's the first time in Israeli history that the prime minister, we had prime minister that resigned, like Ehud Olmert, and went to court. This is the first time that's happening like this. It's a pretty tough day. But I think that Jerusalem today is a more optimistic place. So I hope that means that our future, Israeli future, is more optimistic. It's hard to see it in these days, but I can tell you that we had some very hard years in Jerusalem and things did get better, you know, in a sense. So.
So do you see any challenges that you know, Jerusalem is going towards in the next few years? No, we're talking a lot about the good and the advantages, but I'm sure that there are also like things, you know, new challenges that we're approaching.
First of all, yeah, definitely. First of all, we're a very poor city, very, very poor city. We're a huge city and a poor city. Challenge number 2 is that we don't have enough land. That, you know, Jerusalem was always known for like the 3-4 story buildings, kind of, maybe went up to 6-story buildings, and now we're building these skyscrapers just so everyone has where to live, which is really changing Jerusalem architecture. It's hard to tell how, you know, what is this Jerusalem feeling, what will stay and what won't stay, what will last and what won't last. This is, again, it's kind of a promo, or like Jerusalem is a pilot of what's going to happen in Israel, because Israel is one of the most crowded countries in the OECD or in the Western world. And 2048, Israel is going to be the most crowded country. And so these are issues that everyone's going to have to deal with, but as usual, Jerusalem is before everyone. So those are 2 huge challenges: the economy and the housing and everything. Those are 2 huge. And also, yes, we have a huge challenge regarding the pluralistic groups that still always feel threatened, and they have reasons to feel threatened because we had a very challenging history. There were years, like 15 years ago, that the ultra-Orthodox were saying, you have Tel Aviv, we have Jerusalem, so, you know, leave our city, go to Tel Aviv, and we're going to have Jerusalem. And I think that it was made very clear that that's not going to happen. But still, there's a lot of fear, and we feel that fear. And also, I'll say another challenge is that Jerusalem, sometimes I think it's because that we've been around also during when the Turks were in Israel, but, you know, the Turks were well known for bakshish. Bakshish means bribe, you know, like small bribe, kind of. And Jerusalem is a city where, you know, we're not like Tel Aviv, okay? We're not. There's been quite a bit of bribery throughout the years. I really, really hope that none of this is going on today, but we have our history. I mean, Ehud Olmert, that I mentioned before, was the prime minister. He went to prison, not because of things he did as a prime minister, but of what he did when he was the mayor of Jerusalem. So obviously, these are things that exist. I hope they're not happening today. So if you ask me, what are the challenges? Those are some major challenges we're dealing with. And also, I'll say that if you look at the city from the ultra-Orthodox or the Arab point of view, so I think the ultra-Orthodox have major challenges of their own. Just the ultra-Orthodox society has some major challenges, very poor, men that don't work. They need a lot of investment from the city and from the state. And Eastern Jerusalem, I think a major challenge is, what their narrative is and how do they fit in, and can they fit in? Can it work? Are they giving up their own narrative if they become very Jerusalemite? And also regarding the Eastern Jerusalem, they are residents of Jerusalem. They're not citizens of the state of Israel, which puts them. Yeah, it's an ongoing conflict. Yeah, they can leave the country. It's like everything is more complicated. So on the one hand, they're better off than most of their relatives in Judea and Samaria, because they get, welfare, Israeli welfare, and they have more rights and they can travel more and everything. But on the other hand, they're not in, it's complicated. It's an ongoing conflict. And I'll give you one example that will kind of make it clear. I talked about education. That's one of the fields I'm very familiar with and I worked on a lot. So I told you that the mainstream school system in Eastern Jerusalem is the Jordanian school system. When the Palestinian Authority was established, so the school system became the Palestinian Authority school system. And then you have, and the way it's done is that Israeli government funds the schools, but the curriculum is the Palestinian curriculum. So, when the books are printed by Israel, and they're the Palestinian curriculum. So then there is like a censor or someone that goes through the books to make sure that there's nothing against Israel or against the Israeli soldiers, or a math quiz or something that has how many soldiers, whatever. So we want to avoid all of that. So then you have someone that goes over the books, and anything that isn't appropriate is whitened out. So think of these youngsters that they get a book, which every few pages you have a page that's whitened out. And they don't know, they don't redesign the book. They just leave the whitened out areas. And they're like jokes amongst the teenagers in Eastern Jerusalem, what's in the whitened out pages. And so that, I think, gives in a nutshell kind of the complication of Eastern and Western Jerusalem today.
Right. Thank you. We have a few questions from the audience because we encourage people to ask, and I have a few questions. One question is, are there job opportunities for English-speaking residents in Jerusalem? A lot of our Australians that make Aliyah, they choose to live in Jerusalem, and it's something that they do, think of. And as you said, economy is one of the challenges. Yeah. So is there anything that is provided?
Yes, we have some high-tech companies in Jerusalem, less than we would want to have. But there are some major high-tech companies, and they probably always need English speakers, especially if you have a background in high-tech. You could probably be an English school teacher. There are different things. And also there's a very, very vibrant scene of English speakers in Jerusalem. They live in specific, also I'm an English speaker, but whatever, live in specific neighborhoods, a lot going on. This is kind of, some schools, also the schools are very oriented, specific schools to English-speaking children. So yes, I'll say that altogether, Israel economically is not an easy country, and I'm sure you know it. I'm not saying anything new. And Jerusalem also is not easy, because Jerusalem is the salaries are lower than the center of Israel, but the cost of living is not lower. So, we're kind of demanded to be more modest than anywhere else, because like in the periphery, the salaries are lower, but the cost of living is lower. In Tel Aviv, the salaries are higher and the cost of living is higher. In Jerusalem, the salaries are lower, the cost of living is high. So what people sometimes do is they would work in Tel Aviv, and then they bring in their Tel Aviv salary to Jerusalem. So it means commuting, but on the other hand, we have a pretty good railroad from Jerusalem to Tel Aviv, which arrives pretty quickly, and there are going to be more and more of these trains in the next few years. So I wouldn't worry about that. I mean, it's all solvable, and you have to make your own decision if you're willing to commute and earn more. It's amazing how half an hour can make such a difference, because in the train it's half an hour. So.
Right. One more question. What kind of future can you promise for educated young adults in Jerusalem?
So it's the same kind of question. When I was a city councilwoman, so we had this focus group and we tried to see what is bothering youngsters in Jerusalem. And the three things that came up again and again and again were education, housing, and job opportunities. So regarding housing, the intensive building is something that really changes this. We hope that's something that will change. Regarding education, there are many, many, many more schools being opened than at the time than a decade ago. Really so many, like every year more and more schools. So that really works. Regarding job opportunities, I think that's something that is out of the three. It's still a challenge. There's a lot of work being done, and there's also the government now is changing the way the government invests a lot of money in Jerusalem, because Jerusalem is a weak city, is a poor city, but it's the capital of Israel. So there is a lot of investment being done by the government, governmental investment, and now the investment is going to be a lot on these issues on how do you get change the working force and strengthen the working force, give more job opportunities. So I think Jerusalem is a city that you live in Jerusalem because you love Jerusalem. It's not like the first most comfortable city. I think that's what Gil Chobab was talking about also, that like once people lived in Jerusalem because it was a kind of the default. Today, if you live in Jerusalem, it's because you choose to live in Jerusalem. So 1 million people live in Jerusalem, almost 1 million people. So apparently almost 1 million people want to live in this city, but life in Jerusalem is more challenging in a sense than life in the center of Israel. On the other hand, you get amazing education. Jerusalem is a very vibrant city. Something is going on, something is happening. A lot of the new ideas come up in Jerusalem, a lot of the new community organizers, like something very vibrant is happening in the city. So, if you're interested in this kind of life, like, a meaningful life, very Israeli, Jewish, kind of exciting life. So I think that's mainly what Jerusalem has to offer. And that means that, some other things that housing could be cheaper in other areas, like I discussed, that's what we get in return. Yeah. But 1 million people choose to live here. So I guess it's worth it quite a lot. I mean, we have more people want to live in the city than we have housing for. So something works.
That's true. Recently we have a government established, and we have a minister for Jerusalem, which some people criticized, and it was very controversial. And I even heard that just recently the government kind of approved that every student three times, from grade 1 to grade 12 will visit at least 3 times in Jerusalem. Do you think that it should be, legislated? Should it be as a law, or it's something that, people should just go out of their own decision? I mean, how much does it need to be down to legislation and a law for kids to come and visit?
So I'm not too keen. I mean, I don't. I mean, it's okay. I mean, whatever. But
It's going to help maybe the Jerusalem Day, like you said, like, you know, in Jerusalem Day, that it's more for, it is more for Zioni Dati, for religion.
Yeah. So I think, you see, there's this, well, we'll talk about the government and Jerusalem, okay? Because there are many, the government is supposed to all be located in Jerusalem. But then come the ministers, they live in the center, and they say, what? I'll go every day to Jerusalem. Let's have an office also in Tel Aviv. What happened as the years went by is that you have more and more offices in Tel Aviv, and in Jerusalem, the offices are shrinking. And if you are asking about job opportunities for English speakers, all together, for educated, you know, in Jerusalem, if we would have all of these government great job opportunities, it's different. So we still have, but there are also quite a few offices in Tel Aviv. So here we have all of these politicians, and I know I've been a politician, now I'm on a break, but you know, but I don't include myself in this kind of thing. But you know, they're like, yeah, Jerusalem is so important. We'll have every student 3 times in their life, you know, in their schooling to come to Jerusalem and visit. Then like, okay, are you going to move the offices to Jerusalem? You know, it's very complicated. We tried to do it, and you know, we're kind of saying, you know, okay, I have everyone visit. That's nice, and you know, that's even better, because some offices are just like, you know, they get the minister gets his picture taken on the view of Jerusalem, and it's like, oh, we love Jerusalem. We, you know, kind of scouts. How do you say? Yeah, we're like, you know, we love Jerusalem. Jerusalem is so amazing, but then they don't want to come and work in Jerusalem. And I think that this whole thing of 3 times a year, it's Jerusalem. I try to bring more the point of view, and I really believe in Jerusalem as the capital of Israel, not so much as I think that we need to be able to hold on to Jerusalem also as just a city where 1 million people live in, and also as a city with a lot of meaning, but not necessarily like to try to, as I talked about politics, politics don't do very good to this city. So this whole idea of 3 times in 12 years, from 1st grade to 12th grade, to visit Jerusalem, that's like a very political statement, not because that visiting Jerusalem is political, but because of the minister that offers this, he knows that will give him power in his party when he is voted again in 1.5 years or 2 years or 3 years, whenever the elections will be, how high ranked he will be, because he comes from the Likud, which is typically a right-wing party. So the center of the Likud that decides every politician where they'll be located, he knows that will give him like high rank in his party. So I think that
it's more populism than actual, you know, that it has like, something into
so
it.
I think that that's something, you know, I wish, I mean, I think there's a lot that could be done, and I think it's great that school students will come to Jerusalem. I just think that, you know, if that would be part of many other things he would do for Jerusalem, I think it would be perceived differently.
That's you know, it's so interesting. I feel like we didn't even start, you know, scratching the surface, and I have so many other questions to ask you, even like personally, you know, about your time in politics as a member of the Knesset, and the fact that you chose to, you know what, maybe I have 7 more minutes. Maybe I'll ask it.
7 minutes. Let's go. Yeah.
Okay. So basically, you're a member of the Knesset. You passed unbelievable laws. Some of them I'm infected by, you know, in a good way, affected by, and a lot of other, you know, when I think Haaretz wrote once that you were one of the 100 people who influenced the most in Israeli society in terms of the laws that you passed. And then you chose to leave the Knesset and to run to be a mayor 2 years ago, if I'm not mistaken. And in one of the interviews, you said, you know, my heart is in Jerusalem, and this is where I want to be. But like, my question is, how did you kind of, you know, leave a job that influenced the whole society, like a whole country, and you preferred influencing just a local population?
So first of all, that's what love does to you. When you follow your heart and when you're in love. So I think that's part of that. What?
There's a nice quote in Hebrew about it. "Ahava mekalkelet et hashura."
Yeah. Well, I don't know if it doesn't make it sour, but yeah, that's part of being in love. What happened was that Nir Barkat decided, he was the mayor for a decade, he decided to leave, and there were between 8 to 10 men running for mayor of Jerusalem. And it was very hard for me to see that. I knew that there has to be at least a vision of an option that there'd be a woman mayor in Jerusalem. I didn't think it would happen that time when I ran. I knew it wouldn't happen. But, I said, this is something that has to be as, an option that people can at least visualize. So I decided to run. Very quickly, and I had very good, polls, and it looked very. There was a reason to be confident about, at least making the first round, or doing something that would be meaningful. Very quickly, remember the posters on the bus?
Yes.
So very quickly, I got backlash from the radical groups that were against having women's posters on the bus. And the first step of my campaign, because we were so successful with these, going to the Supreme Court back and forth, was to have posters in the bus. Within 48 hours, 300 buses, 300 posters. The posters were torn off. And that was the welcoming I got. I kept fighting because I'm not a person that gives up, but after 3 months, it was clear that this is, the campaign isn't going the way it's supposed to go. And that's when I left. It's the first time in my life I've ever quit anything. I never quit. I'm very focused. But it was clear that, our hope that Jerusalem is ready or ripe for this kind of, even Orthodox woman. It was way beyond what was possible. That was very sad, but
especially it's sad, especially considering the fact that in Beit Shemesh you have an Orthodox female mayor. So they're ahead of time.
I think Beit Shemesh, I agree. I think Beit Shemesh is like the little sister, the Jerusalem little sister. And sometimes the little ones can do things that the older ones can't. I mean, think of a family, right? The older, it's like, oh, no. But the little one, we didn't even notice, kind of, I know I'm a mother of 4. So like in parenting, the older ones always, you watch everything they do. And then the little ones, I know I'm the second of 6 in my family. And I noticed how my younger siblings, they had some freedoms that I couldn't even dream of having. So I think that's kind of the story of Beit Shemesh, and I know the mayor there, and she's amazing, and we're in touch during the campaign. And I think that what made it also clear is that Jerusalem, I think it needs less challenging years. I mean, I think that the mayor that was elected is kind of a low key person that doesn't really, he's not here to, he's not in the press a lot. He's not here to make major changes. And I think that this is kind of what the city needed. I'm very thankful for the opportunity to run for mayor. And I hope at the time, there were a lot of little girls that were writing me letters, don't give up. We know it's hard. And, we're so happy to see that there's a woman that's running. So I hope it will make a change in the long run. And
when do you?
I don't know.
When do you believe we're gonna?
I think longer than we imagine, unless something dramatic happens.
Wow.
But I think, and at the same time, I can also say that the Israeli parliament isn't going through very hard years. So I think it's a good time to take a break and to work towards the next stage. So in a sense, Jerusalem gave me the opportunity to try the dream, realize it's not working, and to move on to the next stages. So I went into politics for Jerusalem. I never thought it would be, it's like that wasn't part of the thing. And now kind of, I had my Jerusalem closure.
Thank you so much. We have to wrap it up, although I really want to continue. But I really want to thank you for a beautiful conversation, and I wish we will have more in the future. and we'll get to see you more. And Bren, the floor is
and we're happy Jerusalem Day. Yeah, that's it. And thank you.
Thank you so much, Rachel.
Moriah, Raquel, thank you so much for that. That was fascinating. You know, from a distance, Jerusalem always appears more as a symbol. And then, of course, when you live in Jerusalem, yes, it's still the symbol, but it's a real city, and there are, you know, you've got your neighbors and you've got your traffic and you've got everything else. And so it was really from the distance of Australia. Many of us have visited Jerusalem. Some of us have lived in Jerusalem, but it's still, you know, a foreign city. And so it's just wonderful to hear about the city from someone who loves it, but to hear about the nitty gritty, as well as the changes that have happened in Jerusalem, the changes, the good changes, and the good changes that will continue to the future. So Rachel, Moriah, thank you so much. Have a wonderful week, two of you and everyone listening. And a reminder once again that next weekend we'll be having Isaac Herzog and Stephen Lowy discuss. Really what they'll be discussing is the challenges that the COVID-19 pandemic has presented to the world's Jewish communities, and how they are responding and how they will continue responding to that challenge. So I think it'll be a really interesting conversation, and I look forward to you joining us then. Until then, have a great week. Good night.